Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathalie Gendre. I'm the head of Gender and Security at DCAF, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the third and last panel of the day. And this conversation on overcoming barriers to inclusive security. This panel, I think, goes right to the heart of DCAF's mandate of advancing inclusive, accountable, and effective security for all. Today, we celebrate DCAF's 25th anniversary, of course, but we're not simply celebrating or marking a milestone. We're also reaffirming a commitment that for a quarter century, DCAF has worked with security sector institutions, with policymakers, with civil society, and with communities to strengthen governance and to build trust. And over these 25 years, one truth has become clearer, that is that security cannot be effective if it is not inclusive. Evidence shows time and again that when women meaningfully participate, when marginalized communities have a voice, and when institutions reflect the societies that they aim to protect, then security outcomes improve. They become more sustainable and more legitimate. Despite this compelling evidence, we also see that progress towards inclusive security remains slow and uneven. Resistance persists, sometimes rooted in political dynamics, sometimes in institutional structures, sometimes simply in the fear of change. Indeed, I think if inclusion were as easy as adding just one more seat at the table, we would have run out of seats a long time ago. But it's a lot more difficult, and as Ambassador Enderlin alluded to this morning, it demands reflection, it demands accountability, and it demands change. DCAF does see these challenges every day, and where there are challenges, of course, we also see opportunities. Security institutions have an immense potential to drive positive change when they're equipped and when they're supported to do so. So we built our third strategic objective around supporting security sector institutions to recognize and to address the intersectional nature of discrimination and to transform their institutions so they can serve everyone. So this is why inclusive security matters to DCAF. But I also want to say something about how we do inclusive security at DCAF. What we do is that we partner with security institutions, from local police to border authorities to national ministries of defense or international peacekeeping operations, to embed gender equality in their daily work, building skills, policies, budgets, cultures that challenge discrimination. We also support states in crafting and implementing gender-responsive policies, foreign policy, frameworks, and national action plans on women, peace, and security. These are all critical tools that set milestones for more inclusive national agendas. And we also equip practitioners with concrete resources, with guidance and tools. They have become essential for turning commitments into practice. Just as importantly, I think, we also work on our internal capacity. Because if we expect security sector institutions to model inclusion, then DCAF must model inclusion as well. Across all of this, our goal is ambitious, and it's very clear. It's to help build security sectors that do more than provide protection. They listen, they understand, and they respect. We have institutions that grasp how insecurity is experienced differently across society and that work intentionally to dismantle discrimination and gender-based violence. So in today's panel, we will look at how to overcome barriers to inclusive security. I think we've heard a lot already this morning about the importance of inclusion for security. There seems to be a consensus in this room that it's something that is needed. So our objective now is to move beyond diagnosing the problem towards trying to articulate actionable steps for institutions and for individuals who are committed to advancing inclusive security. The panelists that we have will be asked to contribute actionable solutions across 3 segments that we propose, looking at understanding the resistance, at innovations and lessons learned, and finally at translating successes. We've brought together experts who have confronted barriers to inclusion from all angles. They've worked to transform cultures, reshape institutions, and create a more equitable vision of security. We have 4 panelists joining us today. We have 2 here with us, and 2 persons are online. I'm very grateful to all of them for joining us and delighted to introduce them. Let me maybe start with those with me on the stage. So we have Dr. Lara Scarpita, who is the OSCE Senior Advisor on Gender Issues and Head of the Gender Issues Program. Before joining the OSCE, she spent over 15 years with the European Commission and the European External Action Service. We have Mr. Perrault Petland, I'm sorry for butchering your name, Lieutenant Colonel, retired with over 37 years in the Norwegian Armed Forces, infantry by trade, with experience from operations, planning, intelligence, security, and personnel in the Norwegian Armed Forces at all levels. He's been deployed on international missions for the UN, NATO, and NGOs in the Middle East, Eastern and Southern Africa, and Afghanistan. And since 2008, he has focused his career on promoting the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and specifically gender in military operations. And joining us online, we have Ms. Jacqueline O'Neill, who is the Director of Transnational Conflict Analysis and Support at Global Affairs Canada, focused on women, peace and security, including the ELSI Initiative for Women in Peace Operations, and on conflict analysis. Previously, she spent 6 years, nearly, as Canada's first ambassador for women, peace and security, advising the government of Canada on strengthening its global leadership on this issue and the effective implementation of its associated national action plan. And we have Sophia Kaltorp, who is the Director of UN Women in Geneva, UN Women's Chief of Humanitarian Action, and Officer in charge of the Nordic Liaison Office. Prior to joining UN Women, Ms. Kaltorp served as ambassador and special envoy of the Swedish government for gender issues. She's also served as Sweden's ambassador to Zimbabwe and international director of the Swedish Red Cross. Welcome to all 4 of you. Let me maybe dive straight into it with our first segment and stay with you, Sophia, online, and ask you a first question. You've seen commitments to gender inclusion stall at the institutional level. What accountability mechanisms or incentive structures have you found are most effective in sustaining momentum?
Thank you, Natalie, and great to be with you, although online. And let me first very much thank DCAF for all the work you have done over those past 25 years. And I think, Natalie, you outlined it very well in terms of really looking at inclusion as an integrated principle in order to make sure that our joint common objectives in terms of women, peace and security and stability is achieved, because inclusion is of course it's not an abstract principle, but it's very much a matter of legitimacy, but also about durability. And to make sure that we have accountability mechanisms and incentive structures that are really fostering that impact as inclusion not only being a principle but really a means, and the tools for action, I think, is extremely important. As we all know, women and girls are really bearing the brunt of the increasing conflicts that we see across the globe. Today we have over 600 million women and girls living in conflict-affected areas, which is a 50% increase just in the last years. And of course, combined with the systemic backlash on women and girls that we see worldwide, this is really an issue where we need to join forces. And to come back to your question on accountability mechanism, what we have discovered, and what I really think is a starting point, is that resistance to inclusion, it's rarely about lack of knowledge, but it's really about perceived disruption of established hierarchies. So what I think we need to do in terms of finding mechanisms and incentive structures that really have an effect is to dismantle a little bit those power structures and really look at effectiveness. So I would offer kind of free mechanisms or structures that in our perspective we have found very effective. And the first one is leadership-linked accountability, really to make sure that we include targets on inclusion and gender equality in senior leadership performance frameworks, really tying the question of inclusion and gender equality into regular performance structures. Secondly, I think that financial conditionality is extremely important to embed gender-responsive requirements into funding and donor compacts, really making sure that there is also financial price to pay, sort of, not having those mechanisms in place. And then the third one, which is important but possibly the most difficult one, is really about crisis-driven adaptation, to make sure that we always highlight how inclusion improves operational outcomes, and that can be done, of course, at very different levels. But as UN Women in our WPS and humanitarian work, we always, try to highlight how inclusion is the most effective way to reach those operational outcomes that we want to do. So it's really about gender equality as a tool to improve strategic effectiveness and cost efficiencies, which of course is important for many reasons, not least looking at the shrinking funding landscape. So in essence, it's really about looking into empowerment and how we can see, shifting the paradigm from women as recipients of assistance, need to be protected, but rather women as central actors in crisis response, and how we can bring on that force and that empowerment into the overall work for security. So that would, in essence, be my three, top mechanism. But I look very much forward to hear from my fellow panelists and from you on this key question. Thank you, and back over to you.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for these very precise inputs. I like how you speak about perceived disruptions. I feel like a lot of the time when we speak about this issue, we have to make time and again the argument that this is not a zero-sum game. So not because we give to someone that we take away from someone else, but we actually contribute to everyone growing. Let me maybe turn to Jacqueline online also and ask you from a slightly different perspective, from your tenure as the WPS ambassador. How do you see these geopolitical tensions that we're experiencing and these rising anti-gender and anti-rights movements? How do they affect efforts to, advance inclusive security?
Thank you, Natalie. Just confirming you can all hear okay? Yes. Great. Well, good afternoon, good morning from Canada, everyone, to fellow colleagues and dear DCAF colleagues and all in the room. I'm really grateful that you allowed us to be with you remotely today. I'm very grateful we're not appearing as giant heads on the screen. We had a conference in Canada organized by the Canadian Armed Forces on women, peace and security a few weeks ago, and panelists joining remotely filled the entire screen, just their head overlooking everyone, and Natalie was there, so I think we've already transferred some lessons learned from that. Our general liaison to NATO was just mortified, so thank you, Natalie, for the dignity. DCAF is just I just must say, as Sophia started, is really a tremendous partner for Canada, and we really want to thank you. We just have so much respect for your work, particularly the gender and security team. I've been fortunate to work with members of the team almost 15, 20 years now, I think. But we turn to DCAF quite often as a Canadian government for your wisdom, your strategic thinking, and your very practical and solutions-focused work. So thank you, Natalie, Christina, Ambassador Chouard, and others. I love that you have a session on understanding the resistance, or a segment on it, because that is crucial. I think part of understanding the resistance is recognizing it's not only a group of people who are opposed to the ideas that we are presenting or that others are presenting, but a few key points I think we've understood over time. One, of course, the resistance isn't new. We've seen resistance growing and building in different ways, including this kind of anti-gender movement for about 30 years now. The US and some recent statements and positions have accentuated it, but it's not new. Another thing we've learned, of course, is that the resistance is very much well-resourced and well-coordinated. There is a lot of money that is going towards the resistance. The European Parliamentary Forum has been tracking the amount of money between 2009 and 2018, funding to anti-gender organizations in Europe alone was roughly about $700 million US, and over 1.1 billion from 2019 to 2023, and a rapid increase. They're tracking globally, it's about 3.7 billion flowed to anti-gender actors over 4 years. So the money is there. It's also very coordinated. It's not isolated pushback. So we're seeing networks across Europe, across other parts of the world. They're sharing a playbook. They're sharing tactics, strategies. Sometimes literally they have toolkits. They're digital platforms, and they're running multilingual campaigns that coordinate political pressure and mobilization across Europe, Africa, Indo-Pacific, Latin America, and others. So organized, coordinated, funded. We're seeing that the resistance very much can be effective and have direct outcomes on security issues. I mentioned it's been around for a long time. I was reminded through a visit just 2 days ago with a Colombian woman rights defender who'd been very engaged in bringing women's voices into the Colombian government negotiations with the FARC in 2016. And some of you in the room, I'm sure, were directly connected to that process and will remember that that peace process, the proposed peace agreement, had strong language and components on women's rights, and also referenced LGBTQ plus rights. When the referendum, or when the peace agreement went to the Colombian public for referendum, there was a lot of mobilization through the Catholic Church, evangelical churches, far-right movements, for a coordinated campaign saying this would undermine families, really promoting it would be an imposition of gender ideology. And this played a very significant role in swaying Colombian voters to narrowly actually reject the peace agreement between the government and the FARC. Another quick example I'll share is that the resistance is also manipulated and manipulative. And what I mean by that is that we see the resistance and language around the resistance. It's not always about what they say it's about. It can be a means to a different end. So for example, a year and a half ago, or just over a year ago, Canada appointed our first woman chief of the defense staff. And we knew that there would be foreign elements that would be trying to take advantage of cleavages that exist within Canadian society around gender, around perceptions of women's roles, to a different impact. So for example, we saw a lot of Russian disinformation and a lot of Russian bots campaigns, targeted campaigns, saying things like Canada's military is so weak they have a woman commanding it. And what does it say about Canada that they would put a woman in charge? And what a reflection on how little they're willing to actually fight. This was an attempt to undermine Canadian support for our armed services, for NATO, and for our mission in Ukraine. And so what I would say in terms of how we're responding or what we're seeing in terms of responses, a few things. I mean, one, it's important to just know this and anticipate it. So in the case of our Chief of the Defense Staff, we were preparing for this. We had our public relations and comms and head of our institutions understanding that this would not, the reaction in particular online is not simply a reflection of average Canadians' perception of this issue. And we shouldn't take it as a temperature test of the decision, but understanding that this is a political and strategic aspect of warfare, essentially, at this point. So anticipating it institutionally, trying to coordinate as much as possible, so working with partners and allies around the world to be as close to as resourced and coordinated as the counter forces are. And then constantly is unfortunately countering the disinformation. And one of the biggest aspects of disinformation is that ideas of inclusion or ideas of women's leadership are a Western notion that were brought about by diplomats sitting in New York 25 years ago, and constantly countering that this is simply not true, that even the women, peace, and security agenda itself came from women on the front lines of conflict and community in every part of the world, and they're the ones that brought this to the UN. People in communities around the world are the ones working and fighting for inclusion, and they're facing barriers that I know you've been talking about, but this is not something that was invented elsewhere and is being imposed. So it goes very much back to, as I understand, the discussions you've had over the rest of the day about local voices and highlighting and spotlighting and profiling and elevating local voices wherever possible to ensure that we don't fall into traps of allowing those who want to counter this work to have an easier path of saying that it's being imposed. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. I like how both of you actually point out how gender is strategic. It's strategic in terms of increasing operational effectiveness, but then obviously we can expect from the resistance also to use it as a strategic aspect of warfare. So maybe that's actually a perfect transition to my next question to you, Perot, from your experience advising armed forces. In your view, what are the most persistent sources of resistance to integrating gender perspectives in military planning and in military operations?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the invitation, and congratulations with 25th anniversary. Resistance have many facets. One of the most enduring resistances, most generic one, is education, or lack thereof. Jacqueline talked about cells or politicians or parts of society who have either political or ideological resistance against gender. Those are not my concern per se, but the ones listening to them is. So I just want to clarify one thing. I guess most of you know it already, but I work with gender in military operations, and by doing so, I integrate what we call gender perspective. And gender perspective is not, as one of our politicians back in Norway called it, a psychosocial experiment. It is the ability to see how any situation, whether it's caused by security issues or political issues or climate issues, resource issues, is to see how any situation affects different layers of the population differently, or how different layers of the population affect that situation. And that is very military important, to put it that way. before we go into any operational area, we need to know what it is. And so my biggest resistance is actually the lack of knowledge within military organization, politicians for that matter, but normally they have an agenda, so they don't care what is right or wrong. So that's from a generic point of view. Then you have what I call traditionalists, and I might be igniting a flame now, but every single military organization in the world is an organization made by men for men. And as such, they are traditionalists. So changing that traditional view of women can't do this, women can't do this, women shouldn't be in the armed forces, because that goes into participation, which is kind of one of the essences to make any change, either internally or externally in the operational area going into. Because gender perspective, in order to have a gender perspective, you need diversity within your own organization in order to see the different perspectives. So changing that traditional view, and I'll come back to how later, changing that traditional view is one of the biggest challenges, actually. And then I got two more. Evidence. Gender topics in the military, so gender in military operations, is by far the most evidence-based topic I've ever seen. So there are, I don't know how many researches there have been on how gender or women, peace, and security affects military operations conflicts around the world for the last 20, 30 years, but there's been a lot. But in comparison to other parts of the military, other topics like psychological defense, cyber warfare or cyber defense, Army, Navy, Air Force, comprehensive approach, it is always, I'm always told, do you have evidence that it works? Do you have examples that it works? Gender in military operations, or gender perspective, is, as everything else in any operation, any security operation, part of a comprehensive approach. It's part of a whole. Sometimes it has an effect on its own, but mostly it does not. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So in order to ensure if it works or not, then that's where gender analysis comes in prior to, so in planning. So yeah, more or less that. And eventually, as all the other panels today have talked about, resources. Yeah. If a mid-level commander, and it's never a problem on the strategic level, or seldom a problem with the resistance on the strategic or political level, but mid-level a lot. And it's also always about prioritization. Do we have resources to do the soft part when we should concentrate on the kinetic part? And they're combined.
Yes, thank you very much. I can't help but think that they are definitely combined, and that maybe it's the very traditional mindsets and views that don't allow us to see the evidence. But let's maybe move to the second segment and talk more about innovations and lessons learned. And let me turn to Lara and ask, from your perspective and looking at the OSCE, working with diverse political systems and diverse security institutions, how do you think that multilateral organization can better support national security sector reforms that genuinely shift these powers dynamics, rather than, as we were saying, simply adding gender?
No, thank you very much, Natalie, and certainly I'm very happy also to be here, and congratulations to DCAF for this 25th anniversary, for the incredible work that I know you're doing on the ground every day. I mean, just before I go into your question, I just wanted to link in a little bit to what has been said before, because it's a starting point of also the work that we do as OSCE. I mean, today I think it's clear to everyone that we cannot understand security just as the absence of armed conflicts, but we need to really look at peace and security as being about building democratic societies, about resilient societies, and also societies that are able to grow and prosper economically. So we need to have this kind of understanding of peace and security, which is much, much broader. And within this framework, I mean, the OEC, we are using the comprehensive approach. You mentioned about comprehensive approach to security, which of course covers the political and the military aspect, but we also look at environmental and economic aspect, and the environment was also mentioned this morning as being key to our understanding of challenges to securities, to the response to securities, but also the human dimension, human rights, democracy, protection of minorities, and gender equality within this framework and within this understanding of security is not for us an add-on. It is part of the comprehensive security. It's a fundamental tenet that we apply and that we are mainstreaming gender in all our policies and actions. And this is how you really address and break down the structural barriers, is by systematically integrating gender equality and gender mainstreaming in all the policies that you have. So with this sort of framework in mind, going back to your question, organization like the OEC, we have 57 participating states with an incredible wealth of different approaches, but also a wealth of experience. You know, the value added of organizations like ours or the UN is that we are able to provide guidance and also setting standards, building on the best practices and building on the experiences of 57 participating states. For example, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda being one of the key pillars of the work that we do. We are working, and brings me to the second point, you know, providing exchanges of best practices is how multilateral organizations can really be leveraged. We have participating states who are on the 6 national action plans on 1325, and some who have just started developing. Some participating states have integrated disaster risk reduction in the National Action Plan. More important than ever today that we are facing climate change challenges. So this is, I would say, the second point, you know, providing guidance, standard setting, but also promoting exchanges of best practices. A third point that multilateral organization can certainly offer is a platform for dialogue and adaptation. Dialogue, obviously, on hardcore security challenges that we are facing today, but also platform for dialogue with civil society partners. And this is very important when you are trying to implement global commitments on gender equality on the ground. We really need to respond to the needs on the ground, so working with expert organizations like DCAF, but also working with the civil society on the ground is extremely important to make sure that the policies and the legal and the commitments on gender equality are really translated on the ground, and each reality is, of course, different. And a final point, I think it's also extremely important to leverage regional organizations or multilateral frameworks for monitoring and accountability. We have several mechanisms to promote change and structural changes, but we also need the monitoring and accountability. And one of the monitoring and accountability mechanisms that we use quite frequently is also the Women, Peace and Security Humanitarian Action Compact. We are Catholic members as OEC. I know DCAF is a member. These are very valuable tools to ensure that what was agreed at the highest level actually translates into real changes.
Yes, thank you for pointing this out, and also for pointing out the importance of looking at this as an ecosystem of different actors where each has their specific role to play, and definitely the importance of coordinating and monitoring our actions that all go towards the same goal. Maybe turning back to you, Perrault, and taking another perspective again, can you share with us one very concrete example of when inclusive practices have improved operational effectiveness or mission outcomes? What made that change possible, and if replicable, how can it be replicated?
Only one example?
As many as you want, but
okay, good.
They're going to
Thank
signal
you.
me for time at some point.
Well, there are examples on tactical level, operational level, strategic level, political level. So it depends on where you're sitting. The most easy examples are on tactical level, which actually is based on planning from strategic level and down. Most of the experience we have and examples we have are from Afghanistan, which everyone seems, why is everything you have from Afghanistan? Well, all military techniques, resources, material is also based on examples from Afghanistan. No one questions that. But anyway, the most easy example is mixed patrols. Learn from casualties, experience. Taliban was very quick to adopt what we call a gender perspective in their operations. If they saw we had all male checkpoints or patrols, they would utilize women or dress up as women and bypass, because of the cultural society, they would bypass checkpoints with suicide vests. They would utilize children. When we started using mixed patrols or mixed checkpoints, they would utilize children, etc. They would adapt to our gaps. So we started using a gender analysis prior to operations in order to try to alleviate the gaps, minimize the gaps. Specific example from Afghanistan also is the presidential election in 2014. Prior to that, for the first time, the military used gender analysis as part of the analysis for the upcoming election. So I was there from 2013 to 14, serving as gender advisor for the HQ, the headquarters. And we started analyzing what happened in 2010, what were the security threats for different parts of the population, the male voters, the male participants or candidates, the female voters, the female candidates, et cetera, et cetera. And in 2014, we were in a assist and advice role, so we didn't do it ourselves. What was the change, the big change in 2014 from 2009 and 10 elections was different cues for men and women, specific female, over between 2,000 and 3,000 female security personnel trained in order to be security personnel at voting stations, specific voting stations for women, if that was possible. Media campaigns directly linked to women because men normally own the resources, the media resources or media platforms, and transportation to and from home to voting places. And the participation of women in the 2014 election was, I think it was about 37% female on the first election, and then 39 on the second election. So at least that was thinking about different layers of the population as different entities and designing security and transportation and resource allocation accordingly was a new thing. So that was really good. When it comes to planning, NATO and UN and EU has now a gender network working within their organization. In NATO, it is systemized. We have gender advisors, gender focal points, gender offices, women peace and security offices, etc., etc. It is also mandatory in planning, depicted in their planning directives, that a gender analysis is to be part of the overall analysis of any operation, and prevention of and prevention and protection concerning conflict-related sexual violence is to be part of the planning from political level and down. So that's systemized. And I just want to mention one last example from the Norwegian Armed Forces. The Norwegian Armed Forces has, in 2014, they established a all-female Special Operations Forces unit. It's called Hunter Troop. And that is not a political decision, or that was not a political decision. It was a decision based on 13 years of Special Operation Forces operations in Afghanistan, and the need for female highly trained operatives within their own structure. Prior to 2014, they engaged specifically police women because we didn't have highly trained ourselves. Now it's an ongoing experiment since 2014, and we have now, I don't know how many hundreds highly trained special operatives in the Special Operations Forces. So that's a direct result of the experience.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing these very precise examples from the tactical and operational levels that are really very illustrative of innovative and of lessons learned and how we can capitalize on this. Maybe changing the perspective again and back to Jacqueline in Ottawa. What innovations in women, peace and security implementation, so in Canada or internationally, have you seen that have meaningfully shifted security sector institutions towards greater inclusion?
Thanks, Natalie. I'll share three examples. The first one, and spoiler alert, a big part of my answer here will be something that DCAF yourselves developed with Canadian support, and I promise I would say this even if I was not speaking at a DCAF organized conference, and you can tell this is true because I've said it in many other places. But the innovation has been the development and use of the MOIT methodology, so measuring opportunities for women in peace operations. We call it the barrier assessment, which is a comprehensive barrier assessment tool for military and police organizations. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that I think this is one of the best contributions that collectively we've made in the world. And I'll explain why I mean this. One of the lessons that we've learned through we're in about year 8 of the LC initiative for women in peace operations, is that often we have been working globally off of inaccurate diagnoses of problems or issues. So frankly, back to Perot's comments, we are functioning in predominantly male-dominated institutions, and when many senior military or police leaders would come together and talk about how to increase the deployment of women specifically to peacekeeping operations, for example, the table was overwhelmingly men in senior positions. And so we often heard things that ultimately were their best analysis or understanding or estimate of the issue. And we'd heard things like women aren't putting themselves forward for peace operations internationally because of their family responsibilities. Or when in mission, women don't want to go on the most dangerous patrols. Something that using this barrier analysis methodology required was actually talking to people at all levels of the organization and asking people who've been deployed and come back, asking those who were considering, asking men and asking women. And we were really able to unpack some of these misdiagnoses. So, for example, the idea women aren't putting themselves forward because they have family responsibilities. In many cases, that's true. Often, though, we learn that many women simply want more information before they make a decision. And so in the absence of information, they were choosing not to. In Canada's case, we did this barrier analysis on ourselves, and we recognized that, yes, women were not putting themselves forward for opportunities. The analysis helped us unpack that often their battalion commanders or their leaders were not sharing opportunities with them because they found having women so valuable in their troops that they did not want them to be deployed internationally for any period. So the information was not getting to them. And then this idea, and we still hear this periodically, but women simply don't want to go on the most dangerous patrols. We find the exact opposite is true, often because women feel they need to prove themselves by going on the most dangerous patrols. But they are assumed that they don't, so they're kept off them, which becomes a cycle of marginalization effectively. The other great thing about this analysis or this methodology is that it gives us consistency roughly that can be adapted to local context, but globally, so we can see how forces compare and contrast internationally. And to get funding to do it, through the LC Initiative Fund, you have to make the results public, which, as we all know, for security institutions is a very tentative or sensitive issue, but you have to share the majority, essentially, of it. And that's been a huge step forward in terms of giving local organizations, civil society activists, community members, a greater window into approaches within security forces. So MOWIP barrier assessment, huge. Another meaningful source of meaningful shifts, I would say, is when we see coming together between, and I would call this sort of the magical combination of senior leadership commitments with people working on the front lines or operational positions. When those two come together and focus on inclusion, focus on operational or institutional change, we see a big difference. Something that we struggle with and we see consistently is what sometimes is called the frozen middle of these institutions, where a number of early senior commanders, early in their senior commander roles, or others are really struggle with how to shift how this is the entire institution works, how this affects their career progression, perceptions of zero-sum thinking, et cetera. So that's a big one. And then the third one is not really an innovation, but it's something where there is often an impetus for a big shift. And unfortunately, that's when there is a crisis, an internal crisis within an organization or an institution. And I cite here in particular the Canadian Armed Forces. We've had sexual misconduct crises that have really garnered national attention at different periods over decades. I don't want to refer to them as waves, but there's been a sort of system where there's been instances, cases that have gotten public attention, outrage. There have been then a commission, recommendations, a study done, and then a decrease in attention to the issue. However, in the last several years, we had a very significant crisis that came to the fore due to misconduct by our Chief of the Defense Staff. Then surfaced a number of other issues. And I think something that came out for us because of how significant it was, how dominant it was in Canadian national discourse, and how much it was undermining Canadians' faith in the Canadian Armed Forces, was something, and I'll come back to this point of inaccurate diagnoses. Previously, we'd been operating in the idea that sexual misconduct was the issue to be addressed. However, this time, through listening to a lot of service members, to civil society and external experts and others, I think we more accurately diagnosed the issue, which is that the problem is not sexual misconduct. The problem is abuses of power and a culture that rewarded toxic notions of power and of strength, and then seeing how this manifested across the organization in bullying and racism and in sexual misconduct. So I don't in any way claim to say that this is addressed or resolved. We've made very important steps forward, but we're on a path. And I say that crises are an impetus for really significant change, because I've sat across the table for many ministers of defense or chief of defense staff in other parts of the world who've said we don't have a problem of sexual abuse within our forces, or we don't have a recruitment problem, or we don't have an inclusion problem in any way. And I want to say, that would make you about the only organization on earth of your size that doesn't have that. But ultimately, sometimes it takes this crisis that seizes attention externally to really generate momentum and attention internally. And I guess the message there is we need to be prepared to never let a good crisis go to waste.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for pointing out how we must be prepared to genuinely look inside the organizations and be also honest with ourselves when we do these assessments. And I think we heard the word diagnosis and the word gender analysis a lot, and it's really important to start with this in order to then be able to move to gender mainstreaming and to other steps. So maybe moving on, because I see that time is passing also, to the third segment and thinking about translating successes across different contexts. Let me turn to you again, Sophia, and thinking about global institutions like UN Women that aim at supporting national and local actors who are pushing for inclusive reforms in often politically very sensitive environments. Considering that UN Women operates at this nexus of humanitarian response and peace building, how do you think can inclusive approaches in humanitarian action translate also into stronger peace and security outcomes?
Thank you, Natalie, for that question. And I would like to, Laura talked about the notion of broader peace and security concepts, and I think that's really a point of departure in this, because as you also said, we have to look across the nexus of humanitarian response, peace building, and ultimately strengthen institutions. And what we always see in all the contexts where we operate is, of course, that when women are meaningfully engaged and participate in crisis decision-making, in humanitarian decision-making, be it at humanitarian country teams or in other mechanisms, they carry that leadership into peace-building and recovery processes. So for us, it's, sometimes you see the nexus as a sort of continuum, but I really would like to stress that it's a circle where we need to make sure that women are meaningfully included at all stages of decision-making. It relates also, I think, the example Jackie shared on misconduct, and that at the end of the day it's about power and letting women into those spaces where decisions are made, because then, and we need to build that from the very onset of a humanitarian crisis. So just as a very concrete example, I was in Gaza last week, where we worked to very much strengthen the agency of women-led organizations on the ground in this very critical situation, because we do know that they will carry with them that agency into peace building and recovery, and ultimately we will have more inclusive peace building platforms and arenas that will also be more sustainable. So I would say there are possibly three shifts that are needed here. One is the integrated leadership mandates that we talked about, to make sure that women are really part of strategic decision making at every stage. We also, as I mentioned earlier, need to make sure that we have funding models that are incentivizing that, and also as UN Women, but together with you and others, really make sure that the inclusion aspect is thought through from the very beginning. And again, as Laura said, we have to look at this from a very holistic perspective of human security. So my last point would be, and that is also in terms of how we build this capacity, is how and I think in the humanitarian context specifically, where we have seen now with the humanitarian reset a complete rethinking on how we should work, and as you also said, a crisis is opportunity, and I think this is the opportunity to really invest in local women-led organizations. We talk a lot about localization these days, and for us, localization, it's not only a way of making our support more effective and localized, but it's really about strengthening the agency of local women-led organizations and make sure that we do that investment, because it's really how I think. I mean, the most the most important thing we could do when we want to, if we want to make sure that humanitarian action and all the efforts we put into emergency aid really translate into stronger peace and security outcomes in a more sustained way. So that would be my only key ask, to invest in local women-led organizations. And I saw that myself when I was in Gaza last week again. I mean, it's in every crisis context, in every humanitarian context, you have women who are, in the midst of almost nothing, trying to rebuild not only their own lives but their societies, and we need to tap into that agency. Thank you, and back over to you.
Thank you very much for highlighting this. Let me maybe turn to Lara again and ask, from your regional security governance perspective, how do we ensure inclusive security isn't just siloed, under gender, but rather becomes a standard component of overall security effectiveness?
Thank you very much for this question, also because this represents probably the biggest challenge that we are facing today. Not to treat gender equality as being an add-on, put some gender in stir and something will come out, but really integrate it. It's a big challenge that we are facing. I think I would say three areas that for us are a priority. Also, if I may, also building on my own experience on working in conflict areas. And I think one of the first aspect that we need to deal with, one of the first recommendations that I would have, is that we need to really link. First of all, we need to make sure that women are seriously included in all peace and security efforts. And this also means making sure that women are at the table in all the conflict cycle discussions, from ceasefire agreements, peace negotiations, post-conflict recovery and reconstructions. This, unfortunately, is not the case. We lack women in all major peace processes. I believe that the numbers count. Of course, sometimes it is tokenistic, women participation, but the numbers do count. So we really need to start still, and I think also the Secretary General latest call and pledge for women inclusion in peace processes, UN Secretary General, was an important move because 25 years after UN Security Council Resolution 1325, we still don't have women in peace processes at track one level. So let's bring the women in all the steps where peace and security is being negotiated. Secondly, we need to make sure that also gender equality is mainstreamed in all the conflict cycle steps. So, and this means that when it's not just about gender analysis, integrating a gender analysis, but it's also making sure, and I want to, on this I link up to what Sophia also mentioned, is that the role of women in conflict prevention, in crisis response, in peace building is recognized. Because right now, this is not the case, and in particular the role of local women organization is acknowledged. Because of course you have the track one process, but you also have the local, linking the formal and informal processes. And here is where recognizing and supporting the role of local organization play is fundamental. And third, as a third step, I think we also need to start working more on creating a culture of inclusion. Within the security sector institutions, by bringing women and men at the table. This morning it was mentioned the importance of engaging men for gender equality. I think there is no other sector which is more important doing it in such a male-dominated area. So you need to empower women on the one hand, but at the same time you need to work on promoting this culture of inclusion in male-dominated areas. And this is a strategy which needs to be long-term and needs to be integrated, for example, training, capacity building, gender training within military academies. It's been, for example, essential part of it, or within the police and the security sectors. Start also very early in training, because it takes time to be embedded in order to avoid it. It's just a nudge-on. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This resonates very much to the last question that I wanted to ask Perrault, this question of engaging men. So from your perspective, how can we engage male leadership within security sector institutions to be allies, rather than seeing gender inclusion as, a compliance exercise?
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say that resistance from military leaders, I've met both male and female resistance to gender perspective inclusion. So, but predominantly male leaders. Depends on, again, which level you are. Strategic level, you can use the carrot or the stick. The stick is the policy, normally the National Action Plan. If in the National Action Plan it is mentioned that UNSCR 1325 Women, Peace and Security Agenda is to be implemented, then that's a big stick. You're not doing what you're told to do by the government, etc., etc. That works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't, because then it's a resource thing. What normally works is show me the money. And in this respect, I mean, what's in it for me? Show me that this works. And this is where examples come in. Because, as I mentioned earlier, mid-level commanders, and it's always I think it was Jacqueline who mentioned the frozen middle. It's always a matter of prioritization. Why should I use money and resources on this topic when I have so many other topics that is on my list? And then again, it's to show that in both using an internal gender analysis in order to improve your own organization, and then an external gender analysis to improve your operations and how they are linked together, is adamant to actually get them on board. I've seen many leaders at courses at Nordic Center for Gender and Military Operations coming in, if not openly critical, then kind of doubtful, and then coming out, okay, this is a different perspective. We haven't tried this before. We've failed on others, so why not try this? Yeah. So, and that's again and again and again showing them examples that relates to them. Are they logistics trained? Then show them logistics examples. Are they infantry trained? Show them infantry examples, etc., etc. So, and this is one of my big points, and this is, I think it was, what was his name again? Arugay, the professor from the Philippines. He talked about the gap between academics and practitioners. There are a lot of policies, there are a lot of research on gender. Very few have been translated into practical implication. That is my job as a gender advisor. As soon as I was the gender advisor in the Norwegian Defense Staff in 2020, one of the first things I did was to get that position into operations, because that was the consideration or the priority of the military leaders. And then for the internal gender analysis, that was the HR division that was in charge of that. I had a close cooperation, but that was the diversity and inclusion advisor. So showing them that this is a military, and it's been mentioned many times, people-centric approach. But and also ensuring them that my objective is exactly the same as yours. Your military objective is my objective. I don't have an own agenda to save the whole world or whatever. The military and the police, for that matter, their main job, main objective will never be gender equality for all. But we are a tool in order to ensure that that happens. And that is really important to know.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. I think we're almost out of time, but we did start a few minutes late, so we're going to take a few more minutes, I think. Yes. I just really want to open the floor and see if there are any questions, either in the room or, yes, I see some hands up, or on the online. But I see a couple of questions in the room.
Oh, hello. Okay. Hi, so my name is Yasmin. First of all, thank you all so much for your insightful comments and for being here today. I'm a public health specialist by training. I'm an epidemiologist. I'm from Canada as well. And I've worked in public health. Hi, yes. I worked in public health emergencies, Ebola, COVID, and I've also worked in health system strengthening in complex humanitarian environments such as Somalia. And so in the past years, I've realized that the intersection of health and peace is so critical, and I thought it was overlooked, but really there is so much discussion about this in the peace and conflict and security sector as well. And so the question that I had specifically for fellow Canadian Ms. Jacqueline, what do you see as the biggest policy gaps in linking global health security and the WPS agenda, if anything, and if necessary? So just what are your thoughts on that intersection?
Maybe before jumping to the answer, we can collect another question. Yeah, sorry. I'll give you some time to think about this very easy question also.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, happy birthday for your anniversary. I had before also some ideas to make some comments, but I had not really a question, and it's not good. I know it's from TV, the old man just making comments, and that is not enough. But to this point I have, and I know it's a bit dangerous for me, maybe it's not the mainstream. Klaus-Peter Kilian, I'm a former police commander, worked also 3.5 years in Afghanistan, so I'm quite familiar with a couple of points you mentioned. Now I'm working for a global security sector reform foundation in Germany, and for this I'm here. We have several missions, projects in Ukraine, in Moldova, in Nigeria, Chile, Colombia. And we are not only focused on police, but we are focused a lot of equal force. And we are very happy to support leadership, female leadership courses all over in this project. But 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, 2 days ago, I came from Kiev, because every month I'm 10 days in Kiev. And I was sitting with somebody together with one leg and without arms. And when I'm passing the streets in Kiev, I see so many handicapped people, handicapped men, not ladies, handicapped men without legs, without arms, without eyes. And I remember, I was born 1995, I remember it looks in Germany the same. When I crossed the street in the 60s, and I saw the handicapped men coming back from war. And now my question, is that really what you want? You want to bring the women in the same position as the men? The war is completely changed. Afghanistan is history. All the other wars we know is history. We have the position war as in the First World War, with a difference that 1 million drones is flying, and a drone costs 400 euro, and a tank will survive 20 minutes. And luckily, I would say, there are men in the fight, and the ladies are in the second line. And as a man, I don't want to see the ladies without legs, without arms in the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? No. So, Jacqueline, maybe let's turn to you for the first question, and then I know Perot has expressed an interest in responding to this comment. Thanks.
Thanks. Yasmin, your question was, are there policy gaps? I would say there are not policy gaps, because our policy is to understand and do, as Perot and others mentioned, a gendered analysis of issues. Fortunately, since the pandemic reminded us, of course, that public health has deep security implications. And so in the case of Canada, for example, our National Action Plan does talk about public health issues like pandemics as security related. And it is a broad framework that says we must understand the context, the dynamics of anything that affects security and its gendered related implications. And I'll give a really brief example of this, something that we've I'm always hesitant to use the term lessons learned, because I don't think we've always learned them. Lessons observed perhaps is a better term, but you said you worked on the Ebola crisis, something that we saw very clearly around Ebola, and only citing Liberian instances. There was the use of the military to share a lot of information around Ebola, to issue protocols, calls for certain behaviors. And one of the things that was documented very clearly was that it was women in communities who had the least level of trust in the armed forces and were therefore least likely to believe, to take seriously, to think that guidance that was given or requests that were issued were in their interests. And so there was a lot of non-compliance and a lot of issues recognizing that, of course, women were the ones that were handling we're caring for sick patients, we're handling dead bodies because of local practices. And so the fact that women were not receiving the messages that were being given out by security forces in that instance had a really big detrimental impact. And so when we're planning for operations like that, as everyone in the mission or this panel has talked about, we have to go as early as possible in the planning cycle and actually understand what local dynamics and issues might be so that they can be integrated. Also have thoughts on the second question, but we'll defer to my fellow panelists.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. By all means, we're open to, but I know Perot wanted to answer to the comment, and then, yeah.
Yeah, so concerning your comment, first of all, it's not a rare view. It's not. It's common. Men do not want to see women harmed. It's first of all, a society, in my opinion, and I hope most opinion, society consists of both men and women. We need both men and women in order for a society to go forward at all. I would say that instead of being concerned on women's behalf, let women choose themselves if they want to or not. It's a change of tradition, it's a change of view. I served in Lebanon in 87, 88. We didn't allow women in the front line then. Now we have universal conscription. I talked about the Special Operations Forces. When that first came in, when they first applied for personnel to that Special Operations all-female unit, they had 2,500 female applicants for 80 seats. We now have 37% women in the armed forces as conscripts. They choose themselves. It is mandatory, but the armed forces uses about 40% of all eligible youngsters. So women want to serve, to protect the country. So the view changes as you go along, as you see. So there are a lot of what I would call perceptions that we had 30, 40, 50 years ago. If a female soldier would be harmed in the front line, all men had some kind of relation to her, would concentrate on her instead of doing what they're trained to, they're fighting. That simply isn't true. The necessity of conflict oversees that. So let the women choose themselves.
Thanks, Pero. I think we're running out of time, but I want to open to our panelists for very quick last comments, a minute or so before we close. Lara?
I want to take the opportunity to thank again DCAF for this extremely timely conversation. I think what we've discussed today, it's very clearly a lot has already been done, and there is, I mean, to me, listening to this very, very practical experience, and I mean the role of gender, the gender focal point and the experience that comes from the ground is extremely important. Just as a final thought, I would say there is a lot of experiences, best practices, international commitments, local knowledge that we really need to work together to bring it out, to really be able to respond and to build on, scale up what we know really works. And that would be my first take also from OEC perspective, that we are working a lot on this, capturing these best practices. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lara. Sophia, anything from your end?
Thank you very much also from my end. Thanks to DCAF for bringing us together. And I really think there's been such a rich discussion in terms of how we practically can advance this agenda. I mean, a final word for me would be really how we can shift from inclusive security being sort of an add-on to really see inclusion as a strategic imperative for all the goals that we want to achieve. I think, and Pero talked about that, this strategic mind shift somewhat that we all need to make in terms of the role of women in security. So happy to continue to work with DCAF and everybody else on the panel and in the audience on this from UN Women's side. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Sophia. And Jacqueline, any comments from you?
It's a last request or a last appeal, and that's to all of our male allies, all the men who do support and understand and want to advance security. We need you to be as vocal as possible now more than ever. And I realize that sometimes it doesn't feel safe, or it doesn't feel that this is a conversation that you're essential to, but you are, and we really, really need you. So thank you for being in the audience today, for listening, for participating, and thank you in advance for raising this wherever you can, however you can, so that it doesn't fall only on your women colleagues.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. So I think with this, I'm not going to try and wrap up everything that's been said. I think there are a few themes that emerge quite clearly. The first one for me is really that inclusion requires intention. So whenever we're designing these policies or reforming institutions or responding to crisis, gender equality and intersectional perspective really need to be built in from the start. They cannot be an afterthought. That would be the first one. The second point, I think, that was clear is that transformation happens through partnership. So no single actor can drive this alone. And I think we've seen how across different levels of action, different types of institutions, together we can shift these norms, expectations, and these outcomes. And I think there was also a very clear appeal to, first a very clear observation on the importance of leadership commitment, and a very clear appeal on strengthening this also. And finally, I think it's important to highlight that change is not linear. So even if progress is slow, even if it's uneven or contested sometimes, with the evidence that we have, that's been highlighted, we have a lot, it's about continuing to challenging the status quo and continuing to progress. So as DCAF now enters the next 25 years, I think that's exactly what we will be focusing on. And I thank all of you, panelists, for your expertise, for coming today, for sharing with us honestly your visions, your comments. Thanks for all of you in the room for your engagement. And I herewith close this panel. Thanks.